Marilyn Halder and her son, her and Bob's son, Mike, Christian.
This is Craig.
Craig, like I said, Craig.
They used to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Craig.
I am guessing I am not the only one who traveled a very interesting road to be here today. So we're all allowed to be a little bit confused if we are. But on behalf of Craig and Marilyn, the friends of Admiral Bob, and our beloved community here at the Hilltop Spiritual Center, I welcome you to his celebration of life. What I'm most aware of is that we probably come from a multitude of different lives, maybe even different spiritual paths and histories and choices. But the one thing that we have in common, the one thing that has brought us here today, is that each and every one of us had the experience of loving and being loved by Admiral Bob. And it is that love that unites us here as one community. And so we celebrate that. The great American poet and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "It is only the finite that is wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose." It is the finite that we miss. His amazing smile, his articulation of anything. He was an iron fist in a velvet glove that guided you one way or another. And that's what we will miss. That is the bittersweet. But there is that infinite experience of him, that which was never born and can never die. And so we celebrate. We celebrate in our grief because our grief reminds us of how much we love Admiral Bob. But we celebrate also with a sense of hope, of his experience now continuing to spiral into this thing called life, and the promise that we will unite again. It is said that no great or important undertaking should ever begin without first invoking the blessing from on high. I'd like to introduce a colleague of mine, a friend of Bob and Marilyn, at one point a colleague of Admiral Bob working together at Balboa Hospital. Reverend Carolyn Flanders, chaplain, will do our invocation and say a few words at this time.
Hi, everybody. Wow. Bob would just be so tickled right now. But of course, he wouldn't want you here for this reason. In fact, he probably would have said something like, "Mara, let's just do a party now," right? Not later. But truly, it is my honor and an absolute privilege to be here with all of you. And I will open us up in prayer, but I have some reflections to share with you first. As Reverend Guy so eloquently introduced me, thank you, Reverend Guy. My name is Reverend Caroline Flanders. I am an ordained minister in the Centers for Spiritual Living and a Department of Veterans Affairs certified chaplain. I met Admiral Halder way back in the day. Admiral Halder and I served together at Balboa Naval Hospital during my time, which was from 1990 through 1992. I was a hospital corpsman. I was a junior enlisted person. And, those of you who know Bob well, you would all agree with me. Bob never knew a stranger, right? Never knew a stranger. At the hospital, he would go out of his way to make rounds. He would go to every single corner of that great big hospital and check on all of the patients there. But I really think that what he was most interested in was his staff. He really was vigilant about caring for us that cared for his patients. Now, he still is such a handsome guy. Wouldn't you agree, everyone? I mean, come on, even the men are saying, yeah. Most of us, especially us junior enlisted people, we refer to him as the silver fox. And how many of you have ever been to Balboa Naval Hospital, the new hospital, not the Pink Palace? Okay, so you know how long that courtyard is, right? From the quarterdeck to the ED? It's huge. So you could see Admiral Bob coming from all the way across the courtyard. It was not hard to miss that Admiral brass coming your way. How impressive. During Operation Desert Storm, there was an anticipation of mass casualties, and thankfully that never happened. But Admiral Halder was prepared. He was our valiant leader. And during that time of uncertainty and distress, Bob commanded the Navy flagship of medicine. He was completely prepared and ready to accept whatever the fates may have brought. Bob was the leader who inspired devotion. Bob would cast a vision of strength and courage for all of us, down to the lowly corpsman like me who worked in the basement. We would all quite literally be willing to follow him into battle. He was that kind of leader. And Bob is a true friend, and you all know that. That's why you're here today. But you can imagine my surprise and my joy when about 15 years ago, Marilyn and Bob walked through those doors into this church. I hadn't seen him in a very long time, but I recognized that silver hair from a mile away. And so began a very beautiful and long and fulfilling friendship with Marilyn and Bob. A few years ago, one Sunday after church, we were having lunch together at Fresco, and Bob leaned over to me, and he said to me in my ear, he said, "I want you to be my chaplain." Well, you can imagine my look of astonishment, like, are you kidding me? You're my admiral, you're my CEO. And he just looked at me with that handsome, gentle, dazzling smile, and he said, "You're going to be my chaplain." "Aye, aye, sir." And so you can imagine that it's been a prestigious but also very humbling position to be in, walking alongside of Bob, especially in these last few years. But because of that, Bob gave me tremendous gifts. He gave me the gift of his presence. He gave me, and all of you, the gift of his friendship. Bob gave the gift of mentorship. And he gave the gift of wisdom. I have always endeavored to be like Bob in all of those ways. He continues to teach me even now. This extraordinary man. I watched and learned from Bob over the years, even as he approached awkward situations or high-profile encounters, or when he was talking to somebody who he just met at the restaurant or the grocery store. He was always curious, right? He was always teachable. Bob always asked a lot of questions, and as a chaplain, I used to study him because I wanted to know what kind of questions he was asking people. And how on earth did he remember everything that they told him? Well, the secret was because Bob really cared. He genuinely cared. Bob came into this world very early on in his life, realizing a deep calling to be of service to others. I think when that was awakened in him was that fateful night that Dr. Zipper came to cure him of his terrible earache. Bob was just a little boy, and he had a house call in the middle of the night from Dr. Zippert. Did you say Zippert? Yeah. Zippert. I always thought it was Zipper. Okay. Well, I do believe that that is where Bob's calling to become a physician was awakened. And truly, truly, he is among the most talented and caring physicians that I have ever had the privilege of serving with. And I have served in a lot of medical places. Bob also has a very strong foundation of faith. It is what brought him through life with a spiritual point of view. Bob examined everything through the lens of his most strongly held beliefs. He knew very strongly that he was serving a higher purpose, and he obediently followed God's calling through his entire life. The last night that we were together with Bob, and he was kind of in and out of it, I swear to goodness, he was having a conversation with the great physician. Don't you think we should have a CBC? When am I going to go to the ER? He was still the physician, and he was consulting with the great physician. That was Bob. Bob, whenever I met him, and it was very frequently recently, I would say to him, "So Bob, what are we praying for today?" And we would reflect on the time since our last conversation, our last prayer, and he would very decisively direct his intentions through gratitude and by articulating his heartfelt desires, whatever that was in any given moment. He was very clear about what he envisioned for his life and his connection with the source of all that was good in his life. He already knew and accepted the greatest possible good from our loving God, always already unfolding. It was always a pleasure to affirm that with him. It was always inspiring to witness his faith and his conviction. And today, you're going to hear a lot of wonderful things about him, and you're going to see some great photos of this extraordinary man. And I invite you to be like Bob, to be curious about what you hear and see. Be teachable. What is he still teaching us? And be sincere, because above all else, Bob was a very sincere and loving friend. There's a very deep invitation today to reflect on the many characteristics that Bob cultivated throughout his lifetime and to set a personal intention to be like Bob. To be like Bob in all of his extraordinary ways. In doing so, he will indeed be present. He will be present in everlasting immortality. And as he lives on, not only in your heart and in your memories, Bob will live on through everything that you do. So today it's my privilege now to invite you to prayer. And so I invite you just simply to take a moment to turn within. Allow yourself in this moment to connect to that deep place within your heart where you feel and sense and know the essence of the divine, the presence of God. For there is only one life, and that life is God's life. It is the perfect life. It is the goodness of the divine which is in, through, and as each and every one of us here today. The spark of spirit of Bob, the spark of spirit of all who we love, those present and those who have gone before us, lives and moves and has its being in our hearts. For this we give great thanks. We give thanks. And we receive this blessing of the comfort of community, of love, of memories. We allow our hearts now to fill up on these wonderful, wonderful things. Today and always, let us be like Bob. May his memory be a blessing, and may the peace of God be upon us. Let us together accept and affirm these things by saying, and so it is. Amen.
As Reverend Carolyn was saying, Bob was curious. He and I would have long conversations of both science and spirituality, and not where they opposed each other, but where they met, in that very interesting and sweet place. One conversation we had is, at one point, was what defines us as humans, and what was it that accelerated our evolution? What was it that got us out of the trees and built cities and monuments and many great things? It was the moment we began to think symbolically. Because when we thought symbolically, we could speak symbolically. When we could speak symbolically, we told stories. We are a storytelling species. And my guess is here today, there are countless stories. And so part of our celebration is to come together and briefly would be the word, share those stories. There are 4 people that I'd like to call up individually and invite them to speak. And then if time allows, we will open up for other ones. But rest assured, we have the afternoon to feast and to share, to celebrate, and to cry together. So the first person I would like to invite up is Dr. Bill Hazley, who went to medical school with Admiral Bob. Dr. Hazley, are you here? Yes. Rails are good.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
It's Bill Halsey, like the Admiral, all those Navy-oriented. I'm here to talk about Robert B. Halder, who's an old friend of mine, and he's Bobby to you and Bobby to me. I knew Bobby from medical school, but let me take you through some of those memories, perhaps. Bobby was born in a small town in upstate New York called Wampsville, someplace I'd never heard of. I was in Syracuse most of my life, a few miles away, but he used to always talk about Wampsville. He talked about growing up there with his aunt and uncle, I think it was, and always working there in the summers at a local food factory, I think it was. Bob and I were sort of bonded by another thing. Both of us had been injured in a little bit of skiing in upstate New York. Anybody that's been up there knows that it's ice and more ice. And then the summers, it's all mosquitoes. So that's upstate New York. Well, Bob and I had both been injured, and Bob knew Dr. Zippert, who I always called Zipper also. And when he got injured, he almost lost a kidney. And Dr. Zippert had him on the operative schedule, and he was all set to take him in one morning. And Dr. Zippert came in and said, "Oh, your urine's looking pretty good. I think we're going to put off that surgery." You get a lot of bleeding from the kidneys if you have an injury in that area. Anyway, I didn't do as well. I ruptured my spleen and got to know a few doctors up there in Syracuse. But those experiences brought us both into the medical sphere. I was going to be an engineer otherwise. So that was mentors that we had along the lines that kept us going. That leads into the medical school time in 64 to 68. I had known the doctors at several hospitals there, and those doctors ultimately became not only mentors, but got me jobs and things that brought me into the medical field. So I was involved with the VA a lot and worked over there doing some work with some folks doing some animal surgeries. The bottom line is I knew the place pretty well, the hospital, the streets, the VA, et cetera. So when Bobby showed up, he was deer in a headlight. He didn't know a soul, and I did. So I became the bus driver around a lot of things. We did a lot of experiences that were because I knew the place better than he did. Anyway, one other thing about Syracuse and the medical school. Bobby had a rented house, much bigger than my little apartment. So I used to go over there a lot for some cooking and some things that I couldn't get in my little apartment. I had a lot of mac and cheese in those days and a lot of Ripple. So we got very used to a different world. Anyway, so when Bobby and I were there, medical school is 4 years. So the first year you sort of buckle down and you're doing all the routine anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry and all those things. But the second year you were allowed to go out and do some things that were getting you in the real world. So we worked at a hospital called Krauss Irving. It was right across the street from the medical center. And we were called externs, a term you'll never hear now. I mean, it doesn't exist. But in those days, you were a student. You weren't an intern or an MD, but you were allowed to work in the hospital. And essentially, we did what was called history and physicals. We would go to see the patients that were admitted and wrote up essentially a medical record that now exists more in the electronic field, but this is paper days. We worked in the emergency room. We worked in different spots of the hospital, and it was a great experience. It's too bad the doctors now don't have a clue about this, because essentially there's a different attitude about things going on in medicine these days. But that externship, we had a lot of fun in learning things beyond what you could from the classroom. I worked in the blood bank, and the blood bank was up on the top floor near the operating room, and you cross-match blood, essentially, for somebody that needed it. And so ran into a young nurse up there, a lot of nurses around the hospital, obviously. But that nurse became my wife, Christine. She's here. So hospitals can be good for many things. It followed through that because of that, we ultimately saw each other a lot and got married. And Bob was our best man. So that sort of completed the circle a little bit. When we graduated in '68, we went off and did different things. We sort of lost contact. And when at some point, maybe it was 20 years later, we reconnected at a reunion at Syracuse. And one of the nice things about the memories of that area, it was a place that we had a clam bake every year. And so it was a great place called Henderwaddles. Marilyn probably remembers that. It was just a great thing that brought me then and back into the Bob universe, and that's truly what it was. He's the center. That essentially got us back on track. So we saw a lot of Marilyn and Bob from that time on. We went off to Italy with them. Actually, I shouldn't say with them. They were in Italy, and we met them over there twice. And we had a great job of touring by Marilyn and Bob, including Bob as essentially an ex-race car driver, I think, because Bob knew those roads really well. And as those of you that have been there, it's good to have a chauffeur rather than driving yourself. Bob was always into driving, and actually I think took a race car course at some point, and even had his own racing gloves that he would proudly show off when he was driving. We knew Bob and Marilyn quite well. But Bob was always into reading and watching his golf TV shows, and actually played golf before that, I know, but watching the shows later on. And the Formula One racing that he always liked, again, following through those courses he took and the racing car drivers. He did build a car, or at least I think did most of it, a Shelby Cobra. So it was one of his many things he was off to. Anyway, so, and I had heard he rode some motorcycles, but I didn't see him at that time. He was big into Harleys and taking long trips. So I knew a lot of his life, but never all the details, because I was doing other things. So personally, I retired once from my own medical office. I was over at Scripps, and I had a personal office in the old days where people managed the whole office. You hired and fired. You took care of all the deals, including seeing patients. But that huge administrative side of things wasn't so bad years ago. But now it's gotten to the point, but nobody wants to do that. They go join a UCSD or Scripps or Sharp. Anyway, so we saw each other a lot, and then at some point after I retired that first time, Bob pushed me into going down and trying to work down at Balboa Naval. It was always a thought, but working in private practice, there was no way that was going to work. But I started doing a little bit of volunteer work, and then they ultimately hired me to work part-time. So I was down there like 2 or 3 days a week and seeing. I'm an ENT doctor, and I was in the ENT clinic and working with the residents and the medical students, and actually had my own patients like I had in my private office, and went to the operating room, and I just essentially walked into a different world of the more group practice and the different focuses at the service versus in the private sphere. Anyway. As Bob was not only retired but slowing down a little bit, we had a lot of visits with Bob and Marilyn at the house, and Mika, of course, their little dog. So Mika was there and enjoying our dog too. We used to have a lot of essentially dog walking things with the usual chats that go along with that. And then we have a fire pit, so we had a little fire pit conversation every time they came, and had a little scotch at the same time. That was always good. He was always thoughtful, insightful, and just quite a buddy. So I'm going to miss him a lot. As they say in the Navy, they say fair winds and following seas, and Charlie will remember that. Fair winds and following seas. Good luck, Bob.
Thank you. The next person that I'd like to invite up is Captain Charles Matt. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Charles Mount. I'm a retired Navy captain. Sitting next to me is my wife, Irene. She was a commander in the Navy as well. We're longtime members with Admiral Bob. Unfortunately, Reverend, I didn't know you, but I was in the front office all the time you were at Balboa. But I was stuck next to Admiral Bob. So you've heard many stories, and Bill, thank you for sharing all the comments you did. And Pastor, both of you guys shared many great stories. So I'm gonna keep mine short to you. I had known the Admiral for quite some time, but I was in Washington, D.C., and I was one of the big trainers for the Navy Medical Department, and I got a call from my boss to go out to the conference center because the Navy Surgeon General was holding a conference with all of his admirals. Guess who was at my table? Dr. Bob. So I got to know him for a short time then, and then about a short time after that, I'm in the BOQ, the Bachelor Officer Quarters, Bethesda, and my friend Larry pounds up the stairs and says, Charles. I said, yeah? Charles, there's an admiral's wife down in the lobby who needs help with their computer, otherwise known as Marilyn. Now, you know, when you get a call to help an admiral's wife, you're sort of going to be there rather quickly. And we've been doing it ever since that time. ever since. So I taught her computers and all of that sort of stuff. Little did I know that shortly after that, I'm going to be sent back from Bethesda, Maryland, back to San Diego. I'd already been there many, many tours. I was at his GEOCOM, which was the headquarters. I was due to go inside the hospital to the education department. He stopped me in the hallway, as all good admirals do. He says, Charles, come into my office. Well, you know, the admiral calls you, you go into his office. He said, Charles, I just went to a conference held by the Navy Surgeon General. And all of the adjectives you've heard about Dr. Bob, the one I'm going to share with you is the visionary. He had a profound sense of vision. He said, Charles, I want to change healthcare. What he explained to me during that time frame was, yes, he was a physician as you were, Bill. It wasn't that healthcare was wrong. He didn't feel it served you and I as patients back then. He felt the physicians, the nurses, and staff, it could be better, and that was his goal. So he invited me into his office. He said, Charles, I've been to this program. I want you to, and he stole, you call it borrow, but he stole a copy of the manual. He said, Charles, I want you to go down to the basement, have a cup of coffee, and in 1 hour come back up and see me. And I did that. And he came back up, and I understood what he said. So I only had 3 questions. Admiral, are you sure you want to change healthcare, both for the Navy, America, doing this? Delete it. Okay. So number 3, I asked, all right, Admiral, paint me a vision of what you actually heard at that conference. And he did. He painted me the vision. It was created by the Harvard Medical School and their staff. And it was at that point I started hearing the vision coming through. You will note back when you get there the distinguished medal that Admiral Halder got. It's the second highest medal you can get, short of combat. I was the architect to help him create that. We created the Southern California Coalition for Improving Healthcare. At one time, we had 24 hospitals working for us. And in 5 years, we made a huge change in not only Navy medicine, but Army and Air Force as well. He carried that off into his private practice. He was at Rochester with Mayo and others. So not only was he an impeccable man, he was a husband, he was a father, a grandfather, he was a colleague to many of you, he was an admiral to you and I, but he was a profound visionary. That change is still here because years later, I got to teach him the second level of that. There was a new level to change healthcare, and I'm proud to say it's still alive today. The legacy of Dr. Bob lives on. And as you said, Bill, fair winds and following seas. But you love Dr. Bob, we love Dr. Bob. His legacy will live on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to call up now Don Kingerly, who was a Top Gun. He was also a close friend with the Admiral. And they were scheduled to, he was going to be his escort on the honor flight. And they have had many travels together.
Thank you. My name is Don Kingery, and I'm speaking here on behalf of my wife Shirley as well. I hope to meet and visit with all of you that are here to honor Bob. This is an honor that I never expected and never wanted to experience, but here I am, talking about my friend at his celebration of life. Bob was truly larger than life. I love the man. In many ways, he was my hero. Extraordinarily intelligent, personable, and engaging, he was knowledgeable about everything and could keep anyone's interest on any topic, visiting anyone in any part, and always part company as friends. He made everyone feel seen and cared about. Marilyn, what a loving wife. They were so proud of each other for 1,000 reasons. In the past 2 years, we have gained new and greater insight into Marilyn's love and the core values she exemplifies. She has an inner strength and determination to always stay positive and never give up. We've all heard of folks who will go to the ends of the earth to make things happen. Marilyn epitomizes that person. She was Bob's rock. He needed her, relied on her, and always knew she would do the right thing. It's been an enormous and wonderful impact Bob and Marilyn have had on Shirley and my life. We've not shared more experiences with anyone else on earth. That will never be forgotten. It's mind-numbing to attempt recalling what we've shared in over 30 years, thanks to both of you. We explored Italy, stayed in the historic Sixth Fleet flag accommodations in Gaeta, celebrations attending the Italian host parties in Naples, yachting in Portofino with Italy's Treasury Secretary and his sidearm packing bodyguards. Bob's famous luggage Cram-O-Matic when we travel in cars, always smaller than our American counterparts. Limoncello, Bob's big scooter, his Harley. Meeting Carol Shelby. And Shirley and I certainly learning about Formula One racing. We watched Ferraris, Ducati motorcycles, and Beretta firearms being built. We met in 1993 when we moved into new homes as neighbors. Bob was recently retired from the Navy and working as an independent contractor. I'd recently retired my Navy wings and soon learned that Bob's interest in aviation was to become yet another catalyst for our friendship. I learned that when Bob reported to Pensacola very early in his Navy career to become a flight surgeon, he was blessed to learn to fly the Navy T-28, which is a two-stage supercharged radial engine advanced trainer. Most flight surgeons were given some time in the Beechcraft T-34, not the beastly T-28. Bob not only sold it, but he somehow found his way bagging significant flight time. Bob was very proud of this accomplishment, and it brought our friendship closer. Initially, we had no idea about Marilyn's vast connection with car racing. But in short order, conversation uncovered Bob's interest in auto racing and cars in general, which turned into another shared passion. When Bob and Marilyn were married, a wonderful side story was Marilyn's deep connection to car racing. Bob loved that. Marilyn knew everyone. Once known as Miss Powerine, she was friends with Carol Shelby, Ken Miles, Roger Penske, Dave McDonald, the Unsers, the Bondurant, Dan Gurney, and she still frequently talks to Mario Andretti by phone. Seriously. She just wished him happy birthday 2 weeks ago. Bob considered himself very fortunate in 1,000 ways. Marilyn was at the top of that list. All of this acted as a catalyst which uncovered a multitude of mutual interests and ignited our interest in Bob's story. We already talked about him growing up in Wampsville and going to high school in Oneida, and I'll talk a little bit about that again. But those early experiences were heaven sent for Bob, Dr. Zippert, that is. Bob's interest in medicine went to his core. Long after his retirement, Bob kept abreast of the latest discoveries, procedures, and cures. Shirley and I were blessed to occasionally observe his bedside manner when he was called to transition from our friend to our doctor. Shirley and I have never witnessed a more gentle, caring, and knowledgeable physician. Bob truly found his calling. As a side story, one summer, Shirley and I spent a vacation driving around upstate New York and visited Bob's childhood home in Wampsville. We had learned that his high school in Oneida had done something to honor their deserving graduates, and we wanted to check this out. We talked to various administrators, and we were not having any luck being allowed into the school due to summer construction and renovation, so we decided to dispense with permission and, if necessary, ask for forgiveness, and basically found our own way into the school, where we eventually found Bob Halder's Wall of Fame. There was Bob's handsome face in uniform commemorating the school's honored graduate. We took pictures of the wall as well as of his childhood home, and we knew Bob appreciated it. Bob and I ventured into helping each other with muscle car restoration. Bob joked that we restored our cars 3 times, installing each part first backwards, then maybe even upside down, before finally getting it right. Early on, we began vacationing together, mainly their timeshare in the Canadian Rockies. Lots of golf and lots of dinners. As a sidelight and 100 rounds of golf, I never once beat him. Marilyn and Bob had a deep affection for Italy, which they acquired while stationed there during the years Bob was ascending to flag rank in the Navy. They had moved to Bonsall, but decided to close up their home and move back to the Gaeta Formula area north of Naples. Napoli, right? Napoli. Early on, Shirley and I did not realize that during the years stationed there in the Navy, Marilyn had become fluent in Italian. They settled back into the Italian lifestyle with many friends and a busy social life. Bear with me. They bought a car, Bob a very nice scooter, and Marilyn's brother moved in with them for a number of years. Early on in this new lifestyle, they invited Shirley and I to visit. Little did they know this would develop into an annual adventure where, together for 7 years, we would explore Italy. Can you imagine weeks of exciting travel all over Italy benefited by Marilyn's expert Italian language skills and Bob's expert driving skills? We did it all from Amalfi to Portofino, from Lake Como to Modena, Venice to Bari. We even made driving trips to Spain and Switzerland. It was a lifetime of memories. My friend Bob was addictive. His company is something we all craved and we will miss forever. It's been noted that for us to all enjoy a free and democratic society, our citizenry must be made up primarily of folks who wake every morning automatically wired to just do the right thing. Bob was one of those people who was always going to do the right thing, no matter the advantage or disadvantage of his choices. He was a stellar citizen, doctor, husband, father, and friend. The city of San Diego even declared 28 May as Bob Halder Day. I admired him deeply and will miss him immensely. It might take a week to cover the highlights of his Navy career, but in the end, he was very proud of his Navy cap, and you'll see that on the table in there. And Marilyn will tell you that he wanted to have that cap on all the time. He proudly wore it, and he loved the response it generated out of the public. He decided I had to have one made for me. I wear it with pride, mostly because it was an important gift from Bob. I valued possession of mine for sure. Thank you, Bob, for everything. This is my cap, similar to the one that he has, and he had this made up for me, and I appreciated it deeply. Loved the man. He was a terrific friend. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to introduce Mick Barton, who has known Bob since 1978. They share the same spiritual tradition that we do here at Centers for Spiritual Living, and they were together at one of the first centers together.
You know, it's funny when you lose somebody, it brings to mind things that you don't necessarily think of day to day. You go to dinner or a movie, it's just that evening out with friends. In the moment, you're not thinking, oh, now this is a good memory. I gotta tuck this one away. The meal, the movie, the jokes over cocktails, these things are ephemeral and in the moment don't seem that important in the grand scheme of things. But there are events with a capital E, having certain significance, things that call for awards, medals, promotions, things that may have a profound effect on many lives. Admiral Dr. Robert Halder now, there are memories tucked away. I recall attending Bob's change of command ceremony, marking the end of his military career. I can't really say how many attendees there were, but there were definitely enough folks in dress whites that they could have been visible from the space station. Diane, my wife, hiding back there, she sang the national anthem on that occasion. It was very special to both of us, and judging by how many times Bob watched the DVD himself or shared it with others, our national anthem was more than just a patriotic tune put to paper in mid-March of 1814. That change of command was an event, a very big deal, but perhaps because I have never served in the military, it didn't have the same impact on my memory that some other, we'll just say far less impactful events have had. Diane and I met not Dr. Bob or Admiral Bob, but just plain Bob, while attending the Capo Valley Church of Religious Science some 40-odd years ago. Bob was great to talk to since he seemed to have an interest in just about anything and everything from history to physics, Formula One racing to surgery. At first, I wasn't aware of Bob having any interest in show business. But I should not have been surprised when our ministers suggest we do a fundraiser for the church. We settled on a talent show. I use the word talent in the broadest and most generous sense. Bob volunteered to help out, and after discussing formats, Bob and I decided to MC the show as Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon. We performed shtick between the acts, and the idea seemed sound. A few Tonight Show gags and introductions. One aspect of the production we had not allowed for was the number of people who wanted their moment in the spotlight. No one set a limit on how many acts were to perform. Let's blame this one on the producers. In any case, by the time we got around to setting up the order of appearance, we found we had over 2.5 hours of show. Far more acts than we had created shtick for. We wrote, borrowed, well, let's call it what it was. We stole Karnak and Tea Time movies and some commercials that some might have said were a tad inappropriate for a church-sponsored event. But let me give you some brief samples. Imagine Bob flogging a cut-rate medical center known as Doc in the Box. Based on the fast food model, a drive-up window, a plastic robot to take your order, his pitch went something like this. Yes, friends, we here at the Gurney Group offer you a reasonable price and the ultimate inconvenience with the all-new drive-through Doc in the Box. By the time you reach the window, your prescription is ready. You can even get most surgeries done at Doc's, often without even leaving your car. Whatever hurts, stick it out the window. We'll cut it off as you drive through. Well, he had medical training, what can I say? Bob gave me this intro as the turbaned mystic. And now the mystic sage of the East, the oracle, the seer, the Swami, who knows all, sees all, vizier to the Sultan of Baghdad, and former men's room attendant at the Barstow Holiday Inn, Karnak the Magnificent. Well, somehow it all came together. Karnak, with a lovely turban provided by Marlene Welter. Plenty of comic relief, some of it intentional. We did get a standing O at the curtain, but it was uncertain as to whether the enthusiasm was for our performance skills or for the fact that the show was over. Had someone from the Pentagon been witness to this show, perhaps we would be celebrating Dr. Seaman First Class, Robert Halder. But fortunately for us, most of the congregation were actually in the show, so they couldn't really complain about the length of the production or lack of observable talent. How many of you had the chance to participate in the church's conclave at Asilomar? Anybody? Asilomar, 1, 2, yeah. Okay, a few. It's a very special experience. Seminars, the music, the dining hall. I bring that up because of another bit of ephemera tucked away. Let's call it Bob and the Ballistic Butter Lunch. We were gathered for dinner. I think it was the first night after arrival. Bob was next to me. I glanced over at some point and noticed that Bob was removing his belt. Now that seemed a bit more casual than called for, but hey, that's what Asilomar was for, spiritual discovery. Bob put the belt over his knees with slack in between. Then he loaded the leather launcher with a pat of butter. By rapidly pulling the belt tight, the butter pat was launched across the dining hall. There was a graceful parabolic course that ended with a splashdown on table 12. The flight was so successful that Bob decided to try for a geosynchronous orbit somewhere near the large lighting fixture at the center of the ceiling. Now, once again, the pat was loaded, and without so much as a countdown, Vehicle 2 arched up and made rendezvous with the dining room ceiling. And we can't leave off without mentioning Vestal's Virgins. I know it sounds odd. A member of the Capo Valley congregation had written a play about an advertising executive who had a shot at a very large payday if he could come up with a cosmetics campaign. The catch was the owner of the cosmetic firm demanded that all the models featured in the advertising had to be pure as the driven snow. And hilarity ensued. I wrote some music for the production. Bob was slotted as leading man, and it was all silly fun right up till Bob, as ad maven Bill Vestal, gets caught trying to pass off some young ladies with less than pristine pasts. He realizes his attempt at a con has cost him everything, and he sings "The End of an Empire." Not a dry eye. As in most shows like this, everything works out fine in the end. However, it was not the end for Bill Vestal. He won the contract, as well as the hand of Lois Winchell, crack reporter, played by real-life wife, Marilyn. Events of great moment? Not really. Anything that calls for medal or commendation? Not even close. But these and so many others are the memories that make so many of us who knew him up close say, yeah, those were good ones. Tuck them away. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much. We have an afternoon together, and so for the sake of these stories going on and on and on and on, what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is to find people to share a story, an anecdote, a memory, a joke, whatever it may be. But I would like to open it up if there is one or two people that briefly want to say something here. Briefly being the operative. Yes? Yes, but there's a microphone coming your way. Or you can come up here, which would probably be better because it's being... Can I be second? You can be second. Come on up or come on down.
Good afternoon, and with apologies to Marilyn, I'm Wayne Goodrow.
The camera can't see you there.
Oh, where can it?
Right there.
Where's the? Oh, back there.
Right there.
I'm Wayne Goodrow, and I have a question of, did anybody know Bob before 1958? Cousin? Friend? I thought I'd be the one who knew Bob the longest period of time here because I went to high school with Bob, Oneida High School. And he was a year ahead of me in high school. And one of the stranger things is that I'm actually older than Bob by a month. One of the things that Bob and I shared in high school was we were both members of the National Honor Society, and we would do a number of things together in that organization. Bob went on to Harper College after he graduated from Oneida in 1960. And after 4 years at Harper, he went on to medical school at Syracuse University, where he obtained his medical degree and later his license. Now, you've heard stories about him going to Pensacola, and I have to ask, how many people are Navy folks in here? So not a lot of us. I'm a retired Navy captain also, but Bob went on to Pensacola to go through flight training, which is very unusual for a physician. When I was flying in the Navy, there were about 3 or 4 physicians who had Navy wings of gold, plus their flight surgeon wings. But Bob successfully went through training. He went to a helicopter squadron aboard a carrier for his first tour of duty, and after that, he went on to various postings as a medical doctor. I lost track of Bob about that time. Excuse me. And it was years later that I learned that Bob actually was in Southern California. I was in the Oakland area, Northern California, with my wife Barbara, who was over there at the time, but we had kids in Southern California and grandchildren, so we came down here, and at one point, 5 or 6 years ago, we engaged again with Bob and Marilyn, had several nice lunches with them over the period of time, and until Bob became ill. And unfortunately, we weren't able to spend much time with him after he became ill. Now, one of the things that you should know, Oneida, New York, at that time, anybody ever been to Oneida? All right. It was a town of about 12,000 when my family moved there, so it wasn't a very big town. It's about 9,000 now, which kind of reflects on the economic viability of central New York. Wampsville was, we referred to as a suburb of Oneida. So you've heard Wampsville referred to a couple of times. Wampsville's population was probably 500 or under, so it wasn't very large, but kids from Wampsville would be bused to high school in Oneida. So that was where the Wampsville connection in Oneida came in. And just as a side note, Canastota was another small town just down the street. And anybody ever heard of Carmen Basilio? He was a lightweight boxing champion back in the 1950s, and he went on to establish the World Boxing Hall of Fame in Little Canastota, New York. Fast forward again back to our day here. I wanted to share some of these early reflections of Bob and his life, as it is a celebration of life. My wife and I are deeply saddened at his loss because I would have loved to have more lunches with he and Marilyn. And unfortunately, life goes on, and it doesn't always turn out as we want. So, fair winds, following sea, Admiral Bob. I should say, I never heard him referred to as Bobby. He was in high school, he was always Bob, never Bobby, never Robert, just Bob. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
There's another friend here that drove himself down, and I don't know if he wants to say anything or not, but he went to school with Roland Smith.
So,
Roland, did you want to say anything?
I think I'm obligated because of my love for him.
okay. We have this gentleman right here. Will you be right after that?
Harder for him to walk.
Of course.
Yes, I do. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Excuse me. I have dedicated myself as the representative for the enlisted community that worked with and under, and I don't dare ever call him Bob. The closest I got to just being a nickname was Skipper. And that's what us enlisted people referred to him as. I haven't seen him in 40 years. He was my last commanding officer at the Naval Hospital, Naples, Italy. I was the command master chief. He was the boss of the officers. I was the leadership of the enlisted crew. He was, without a doubt, one of the best doctors, admirals, Navy friend that I ever had. The one gentleman earlier that was speaking about his changing of the outlook on medicine, back in the 85, his idea was make sure you have a happy, well-run crew, and your patients will then receive the finest care possible. The people working here are taking on that responsibility. It's been my pleasure. Haven't seen this young lady for, like I say, 40 years. And nobody has mentioned a little secret I know about her, but I'm sure everybody does. Thank you for the opportunity. And as they say, fair winds and following seas. We love you, Admiral.
We're not in a rush.
Thank you, Reverend.
I'm sorry? You're good right there. There's a camera right there because it's being videoed.
Okay. I first met Bob in Oneida. I'm a graduate also from Oneida High School. And we became instant friends. Shared some milkshakes together, some double dates, and lots of laughs, and some fun in a theater group. I'm a little hesitant now because of a stroke, so you'll indulge me just for a quick moment. But we each come into this life to love a little, laugh a little, cry a little. We make friends, family, and we enjoy the life that was given us. And all of a sudden, we're called home. Truly our home. And what we have to realize is that we will see Bob in just a single moment of time if you compare it to eternity. We'll be there in a few minutes. I'll miss Bob. I will always know Marilyn. And I will also miss, and most of you will remember, Mary, Bob's alter ego. Do most of you know about Mary? Every once in a while, when Bob was pondering a very important question or something, he would turn, he'd say, "What do you think, Mary?" And he would answer his own question from his alter ego of Mary. It turned sometimes into a hysterical and very funny event. He always had that wit, and that Mary worked through him. So I will remember him, and I will miss Mary immensely. Thank you.
I'm Jim Johnson. I'm a retired Navy admiral. And hi, Merrill. And it's been what I want to talk about specifically is Admiral Halder's mentorship and leadership and paying things forward. Just not only a Navy thing to do, it's a very Christian thing to do. I came back into the Navy on active duty in 1983. I was in private practice in San Diego, doing very well. And then in the early 80s, medicine changed. I was a solo practitioner. Ronald Reagan did a lot of good things. One of the things that had a negative effect was the changes in incorporation of medicine made it very difficult for solo practitioners to practice. Anybody who remembers that era knows now that virtually every doctor, no matter what kind of specialty you're in, is in some kind of group situation or works for a hospital or something like that. Wasn't like that in the early 80s. Reagan did all the things that made that possible. And I was in solo practice. I said, this doesn't look good. But Reagan also decided he was going to build a 600-ship Navy. And when I was pondering what kind of group or what was I going to get into, what was I going to do to preserve my situation, I said, I don't know what some of these groups are going to do. Some of them go out of business, and they did. I said, I don't think the Navy's ever going to go out of business. And that was, as far as healthcare in the early 80s, that was where the growth was. So I decided to recall to active duty in 1983, and I was assigned to Camp Pendleton, where Admiral Halder was the Director of Surgical Services. And you notice I always say Admiral Halder, not because we're not friends, but like the previous speaker said, I'm his junior. And I would, skipper, admiral, doctor, Bob is never coming from my lips. It's not only a Navy tradition, but it's the way I was raised by my parents, old school. So it's a sign of respect and a sign of friendship. And I have people who know me, my Navy senior chief said, He calls me doctor, or he calls me doc, or he calls me admiral when he was alive. I said, "Hey, you know, Ernie, you can call me Jim. We're both retired now." I said, "That's never coming from my lips, ever." So in 1983, I came back in the Navy as a lieutenant commander, having had a very successful surgical practice in Southeast San Diego. And I was busy doing my surgery thing with 8 other general surgeons, which to me was the ideal practice. If you're practicing in the military, your patient population, they're all insured. Or their sponsor is insured. They all have mainstream American values. If they don't, the Navy or the military gets rid of them. They're compliant. And so it's the military population is the population that Kaiser and Sharp and all the corporate folks want in their organization. And I loved being in the Navy. It didn't matter if I was at Camp Pendleton, or it didn't matter if I was on a ship in a combat zone. I had good people to practice with and good people to take care of my patients when I was someplace else, and no accounts receivable. No matter where I was, the 15th and the 30th, I got paid like a slot machine. So it was an ideal situation. Initially, I thought I was going to come in for a couple of years and then go back, but I stayed. Admiral Halder mentored me. He saw something in me that, for whatever reason, he thought there was some value to it. He mentored me. He taught me the things about the Navy that helped you get ahead. He gave me my first administrative or non-clinical responsibility, which is to run the Forms Control Committee. Now, when I came in the early 80s, a lot of the things that Charlie talked about, visionary quality and all that, that had already started in the civilian sector. It'd been at least 5 years. So when I came into the Navy didn't know anything about it, but I had 5 years practicing under this new system. And Admiral Halder came to me because they'd gone through their first joint commissioning inspection and gotten not a good assessment of how they were dealing with some of their forms and paperwork. So he said, "I want you to run the Forms Control Committee." And I said, "Gee, what in the world am I going to, that's not operating. That's a desk job, that's paperwork." But my parents have always trained me to say, you don't get to pick your opportunities. Whatever opportunity you have to be good at it. So I went into this, and the first day, this was a committee that met once a month, and it was a disaster. I mean, there was just, it was utter chaos. And in the civilian life, I'd run stuff like this, because that's what you do as a young practicing physician. You get to be on all the committees that do this kind of stuff. So the first thing I said, "Okay, we're going to meet every week." And they looked at me like I was insane. "What do you mean every week?" I said, "Well, this is such a mess, it's going to take that kind of intensity to clean it up. It's probably going to take us 2 or 3 months." They said, "Well, that's not the way we do it." I said, "I don't care. Dr. Halder has given me this assignment, and failure is not an option." So that's what we did, and we cleaned it up, and then I got other things like that. So whether I was in a command with Admiral Halder or just knowing him from other things, he taught me how to be a good senior medical officer. Not only that, he taught me how to mentor other people. So as much as he contributed to the success I've had in my career, I've considered it, because of people like him, that I have to do the same thing for people behind me. And even though I'm 80 years old now, I still do the same. I still do that. So I want you to understand that I am the way I am now, largely because of Bob Halder and people like him. And the people whom I consider my real mentors is just a handful. And I will always remember him and appreciate him for that.
So just a few things before we conclude. Two things I'd like you to know. One is this would be after the celebration of life, you are invited to stay and to visit and to share and to eat and to celebrate. Also, I'd like you to know that the family are inviting you to attend his internment, which will be at the Riverside National Cemetery, and that will be this coming Monday. It begins, if you've ever been to a national cemetery, it begins at 11 o'clock, which means at 11:01 we are on the road. And so you are encouraged to be there at least by 10:40, if not earlier, because they line you and move you and go through those things. And also, if you would please wait for Craig and his son and Marilyn to exit the sanctuary before you leave at the end of our ceremony. So we read in the Apocalypse of St. John that there is a writing there that says, "And that I, John, saw descending from heaven, adorned like a new bride, a new heaven and a new earth. And God shall dwell among his people. He shall pitch his tent among them, and he shall be their God, and they shall be his people. And he will wipe away all those things. There will be no more suffering, no sorrow, no sickness, not even death, for the former things have passed away." And that is our hope. We live here today in the bittersweetness of the finite, but our eyes, like Admiral Bob the visionary, is on the eternal. And so it is only the finite that is wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose. Before we close, I invite you just to join me in a meditation if it feels comfortable for you. Just allowing yourself to be comfortable and to breathe, and just being aware of your breath. And if it feels right, you may gently close your eyes. Admiral Bob loved to work in the field of the imagination. So just imagine with me, if you would, in your mind's eye, to see yourself on a long, gentle, grassy slope that moves down from the forest and gently makes its way to a large and slowly winding river. And perhaps it's a day very much like today that as you are sitting on the grass, you can feel the warmth of the sun on your face and the coolness of the breeze as it moves through you. You can hear the sound of the gently rolling river, and maybe even birds and wind in the trees, the freshness of the flowers you smell in the grass. All in all, it is a perfect day in a perfect setting. And there in your mind's eye, in your imagination, as you find yourself so comfortable and so peaceful in this sacred place, you see the Admiral coming up over the hill, the Silver Fox. And there he is approaching you as you know him so well, with that glint in his eye and that smile on his face. Gentle and intense, loving and present. And as he makes his way to you, he signals for you to stay seated as he sits beside you. And there it is. There is you, and there is him. And so in this moment, if there is anything unfinished you wanted to speak to him, if there is anything else you want to say to him, in your heart, in your mind's eye, speak to Admiral Bob now. And as you are finished speaking, you are looking at him, and he is listening so deeply and so intensely, as he always does. He pauses for that moment and looks at you and says, you know, at the end there is only love. Love that has brought us here, love that has sustained us, and love that goes on. All that is between you and I is love. And then he stands and he invites you to stand with him as you begin to walk down toward the river. And there you see there is a small boat with what looks like an angelic presence at the till. You gently make your way there. And as you do, he smiles at you and steps into the boat. Your eyes are locked. And as the boat is pulling from the shore slowly, your eyes stay with each other, and he is smiling at you. And as the boat continues to move further and further into the river, there is a point where he stops, smiles at you again, and then turns, because he is no longer facing this shore. His attention is no longer here. And just as in our mind it looks like he is getting smaller and smaller, what we know on that far shore, he is becoming more real, more present, larger and larger. And so as he is traveling to the land of our ancestors, we bless him. And we open our hearts in gratitude in this moment for having had this opportunity to spend a season with Admiral Bob. We are grateful for the love, the attention that he has given. We are grateful for the vision that he held that has made this world a better place, truly. We are grateful for all the fun and his zeal for life, and all the celebrations and all the jokes. We are grateful to have had the opportunity to love and receive love from so great a soul. And so we bless Admiral Bob on his journey. We give thanks as he continues to spiral in this thing called everlasting life. We bless him. Fair skies. We bow, knowing that in time we shall meet again.